Hello, and welcome to Soothing Pod Sleep Stories. My name is Arif, and tonight I will be your guide as we once again travel to the rocky coast of Maine and enjoy a rainy summer weekend as Caspian and Marceline fall more deeply in love with one another. Before we begin, however, let us take a moment to relax and find comfort in the space that we are in, here and now. Allow your body to relax on your mattress. With your eyes closed and with your body in a comfortable position, I want you to use your imagination with me. Picture the mattress you are on, peacefully floating on a calm, smooth body of water. You are completely safe here, in your own little world, away from the expectations of your ordinary life. As you float, you can feel the warm sun kiss your skin, easing your body and mind in ways that only the sweet summer sun can. As you feel those rays warming your body and bringing it comfort, I want you to picture a gentle, soft wave lapping up onto you, touching your hands on either side. As this wave brushes over the top of your hand, savor the weightlessness that it brings. Feel that warm water melting away any tension you may be carrying as your hands fully and completely relax. Then, imagine that wave going a little further up your arm. Feel your fists unclench. Feel your wrists and forearms and biceps change as they become weightless, as they completely stop tensing. Follow the wave as it brushes up your feet and your legs, allowing them to fully sink into the mattress underneath you. Follow the wave as it brushes over your neck and shoulders, reminding you to unclench your jaw, lift your head away from your shoulders, and expel any soreness or tightness you've been carrying around in your neck. Finally, feel the wave coat your whole body. You are floating peacefully now in this safe, calm body of water. There is no weight on you, no current. It is as if you are simply floating, warm, weightless, and content. You can float there for hours without having to move, without having to paddle. The water is supporting you, and overhead, the sun is reminding you that everything is okay. Now that we have taken the time to relax and find comfort in the space that we are in, here and now, let us begin. She hadn't been on the island long, but Marceline already knew what time of morning it was without opening her eyes. First, the chill and heavy fog of the early morning air would lift. You could feel the dampness leave, replaced by the briny smell of ocean waves crashing along the rocks just beyond the window. Then, she could hear the sound of the lobster boats. When she was living as a mermaid, she didn't care much for the lobster men and women, but now she appreciated hearing them in the dawn hours as they puttered across the water, heading over when the seas were calm and had not yet awakened. She would then hear the steady noise of the lobster men casting their traps into the water, It was a rolling, 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 rolling sound, followed by a plunk, 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 plunk into the water. Then their engines would start up, and they would put, 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 putter away again, weaving their way through the ocean to their next trap spot. On occasion, she swore she could hear them sipping their morning coffee, but Caspian had many times giggled at that very notion. After the lobstermen went to work, that's when the soundscape of the island itself would change. The crickets that sang their song into the night for hours and hours would gradually fade, replaced instead by the growing chirp of birds nestled high in the pines. The birds in their lofty homes would awaken as the first rays of light graced their nests, though the sun had quite a way to go before it would reach the people below. In just a week, Marceline had already learned the different calls of the birds. She knew the distinct sound of the chickadees as they turned their dark, shimmering eyes up to the morning light. The chicka-chicka-dee-dee was almost a constant hum in the summer months. She knew the call of the cardinals, though Caspian told her that in the winter months their song was even more beautiful than during summer. He spoke often of the way their bright red feathers would pop against the cottony snow as they dipped and dived through the snow-capped pine and cedar trees. Then, without fail, as soon as the birds began to sing their song to the universe, Caspian would reach across the bed as if to make sure she was still there. His soft fingers would find their way around her bare waist and rub against her skin reassuringly. Marceline wasn't sure if Caspian was aware he was doing this or not, but every morning a peaceful look would wash over him as soon as his skin touched hers. At his touch, Marceline would lie in the bamboo sheets for a few more moments, her eyes closed, breathing in the sounds and the smells and the feeling of the morning hours. Everything was calm. The world was full of potential, and yet she could stay in bed for as long as she desired. However, she was always the first up and out of the sheets. As she made her way out of Caspian's gentle grasp, he would reach for her once, twice, 3 times before he would finally fall back into his deeper sleep and curl against the pillow. That morning in particular, Marceline found herself smiling as she wandered out into the kitchen. She gazed out the windows at the calm sea. The sunrise was painting the sky with swaths of vibrant red. It reminded her of the old sailor's saying, one that mermaids whispered often beneath the waves. Red skies at night, sailors' delight. Red skies in the morning, sailors' warning. It wasn't just that told Marceline about the weather that was sweeping across the Atlantic, heading their way. It was the fact that the morning fog was still hanging around. It clung to the ground like a blanket, veiling the beautiful, flower-peppered yard in a mystical haze. She'd swear that on mornings like this, she could smell the storm in the air. Out on the sea, she certainly could, but now, the smell of the air was mixed with the smell of lilacs and lavender and pansies that were growing in the garden. But there was something she needed to do today before the storm swept across their little island community. Something she had been eager to do since she arrived on the island all those days ago. She wanted to swim. Though she loved being human, having legs was, quite frankly, exhausting. She longed to glide through the water, to feel the waves lap against her tail and her skin, reminding her of home. And luckily for her, Caspian was an avid swimmer. For a human, she crossed to the bedroom and placed a hand on his cheek, smiling sweetly. Caspian put his hand over hers and tenderly rubbed his eyes. "What is it, my darling?" he asked, his voice still heavy from his slumber. Marceline leaned down, planting a gentle kiss on his lips. "I'll race you to the buoy," she whispered. She felt Caspian smile, his lips still mere inches from hers. He threw the covers off of himself and put on his swim trunks before he followed Marceline out to the front of the house. They walked down the stone staircase to the rickety wooden pier that extended out over the water. The brilliant red sky was reflected on the sea, shimmering and shifting as the gentle current underneath ebbed and flowed, ebbed and flowed, ebbed and flowed, ebbed and flowed. Caspian smiled at the image before him for a moment. Marceline was perched on the edge of the pier, her figure silhouetted by that vibrant red sun. She was smiling back at him, urging him forward, urging him into the cool waves below. And without much particular fanfare, she dove into the waves. It was effortless, graceful, so intertwined with her being that it was as if she had just taken a simple breath, and yet Caspian was mesmerized. He scurried down the pier after her and dove into the waves himself. As his head slid into the water, he felt suspended for a moment. Everything around him was muffled and calm. Any worries or hesitations or weight he felt simply melted away. It was as though time around him had frozen for a moment, allowing him to just be without anyone else around. When he emerged from the waves, there was a smile on his face. He began to swim, the same route he swam as a child. Way back when he was a child, every morning would start with a swim out to the buoy. His father would wake him up, and he would scramble out to the water with his mom, a morning ritual. It took some time to be able to reach the buoy, but once he did, it was something he craved, something he needed desperately to get his day started. And now, he was still doing it, although this was slightly different, because beside him, he could feel the flick of Marceline's tail. He slid on his goggles and dove underwater, wanting to catch a glimpse. Marceline was already beautiful, breathtaking, but underwater, she was at home. She was herself. She had a tail that was the most otherworldly blue he had ever seen, a cornflower color that popped out of the water underneath, yet blended in from above. It was flecked with spots and swaths of color, cerulean, white, creams, indigo, turquoise. It was like a galaxy had been poured over her scales, and she moved with such grace. It was truly effortless for her, as if she was a part of the waves themselves. Sometimes she would raise her hands nimbly above her head, like a ballerina standing on her tippy toes. Other times, she would let her arms and hands trail gracefully behind her. But one thing was always the same. She was always smiling, smiling so freely and so honestly and wholeheartedly that it made Caspian's heart ache with longing and admiration. She was free here. The world was hers. Caspian would swim after her as if in a trance, watching her dip and dive and glide through the waves as if she were dancing to the soundtrack of the ocean, a soundtrack that Caspian himself could not hear. He wouldn't swim particularly hard or fast. He was so transfixed by her, by the grace that she possessed, that the race that they were in was the last thing on his mind. As they approached the buoy on that particular foggy summer morning, Marceline popped out of the water with a smile that outshone the world around them. "I think you're getting slower, my love," she chuckled as she propped herself up onto the buoy. Caspian hopped up beside her. From that spot on the buoy, far out in the waves, they could watch the island stir awake. They watched as the rays of light sunk deeper and deeper through the pine trees, illuminating the homes below. They watched as people emerged from their houses and hopped on their bikes, which they would use to glide over the cobblestone streets to go to work. This was one of their favorite parts of the day. They felt as though they had a front row seat to the world awakening, and they loved it deeply. But as more boats put, puttered out of the harbor, they would know it was time to go back. Marceline would dive into the water without even making a splash, and Caspian would follow, albeit a little less gracefully. But this time around, they wouldn't swim to race. They would swim to spend time together. Marceline would swim alongside Caspian, intertwining her fingers with his on occasion. There was magic in the water between them, and that feeling of the world being far away and the morning being suspended in time. It was so much stronger when they were together. That morning, Marceline did something she rarely did. She intertwined her fingers with Caspian's and led him down, 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 down to the sea floor below. They skirted around rocks and brushed against seaweed and kelp, dipping and diving through a world entirely its own. With Marceline's agility, they could explore much of the sea floor before they had to emerge above the waves for Caspian to get a deep breath of that beautiful morning air. In those few moments, far beneath the waves, Caspian felt like he got to understand Marceline more than ever. When they returned to the pier, Marceline hovered in the water for an instant. She floated on her back, her eyes closed, looking completely and utterly at peace as the ocean currents around her gently rocked her body. She wanted to soak up a few more moments in the waves, a few more moments in her natural habitat. And it was then that the storm began. Cool, heavy drops of rain began to dance across the water, pitter-pattering as they left small, expanding ripples on the surface of the ocean. The cool droplets were a welcome contrast to the sea water they were floating in. For a moment, they could remember that it's all connected. The ocean, the sky, the wild, vibrant plants growing on the rocky coastline beside them. The rain began to pick up. What started off with slow, heavy drops gradually increased into a downpour. The kind of downpour that makes the world stop for an instant. It was like the world was shrouded in a curtain of rain. Marceline began to giggle as the rain poured over her. Caspian found himself laughing as well. It was as if something deep within them had awakened and once again become connected to the world around them. Caspian took Marceline's hand and helped her out of the waves. However, her legs had not yet returned. Her bright blue tail was dangling from his arms, glistening in the falling rain. He carried her up, 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 up the stone staircase, just as he had those days ago when she arrived on the island. It would be quite some time for her human legs to re-emerge. It was a slow process, the magic. So Caspian did exactly what Marceline wanted. He smiled and put her down in the bathtub. He poured in her favorite scent, a mix of lavender and eucalyptus that was both relaxing and invigorating all at once. He sat by her side as the tub filled with bubbles, which gently brushed and swished against her skin. She closed her eyes as she seemingly melted into the tub, her whole body relaxed by the contrast of her experiences that morning. The cold ocean water, the cool raindrops, the warmth of the steaming water in this lavender eucalyptus tub. Then Caspian did something he did often, but often didn't do well. He meandered into the kitchen and got to work making breakfast for Marceline. Neither of them were particularly successful chefs, primarily because Marceline had never even seen an oven or a spatula until a week ago. Caspian cracked a farm-fresh egg into the cast iron pan. He had gotten it just down the road at Flora Clearwater's home. The chickens lived in peace behind a white picket fence, where they had miles of land to scurry around, and warm rocks they could sun on. The windows in the kitchen were wide open. As the egg sizzled in the pan, it matched the intensity and rhythm of the rain that was pouring mere inches away. The steam that filled the air seemed to mingle with the scent of the rain, creating a calming experience that gave Caspian a boost of confidence. He diced up some tomatoes and herbs and mixed them with feta cheese to make a flavorful bruschetta topping. Then he popped a few pieces of rustic bread into the pan, toasting it after the egg. And finally, the meal was done. He slathered the topping over the bruschetta with a smile and brought it to the table alongside the egg. Marceline glowed at the sight of breakfast. Granted, that wasn't necessarily a reflection of the quality of the meal itself. Caspian had served her many burnt meals in the few days they had spent together, and Marceline would choke down each one with a smile. She would thank him profusely, telling him the meal was wonderful, and gazing at him as if he was the greatest chef on earth. Even after the worst meals he served her, she would still greet every plate like it was about to be the greatest meal she had ever had. Marceline was a person full of gratitude. She was grateful for the feeling of the bubbles against her skin. She was grateful for the smell of the eucalyptus and lavender, for the sound of that rain pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-pattering just outside the window. And of course, she was grateful for Caspian. She was grateful for every bit of effort he put in for her to make her day better, to make her stomach full. He may not have been the most professional, put-together adult that she knew, but he was a person of integrity, of kindness, of effort, and she wouldn't exchange that for the greatest chef on earth. She ate every last bite of the breakfast, and to her surprise, it was absolutely delicious. Caspian had clearly learned from his past mistakes, and Marceline found herself smiling as she took the last bite of bruschetta off the plate. By then, her tail had disappeared, and in its place, legs appeared. She had grown more and more accustomed to this transformation, though it wasn't something she enjoyed entirely. However, she did love the way it felt to dance with them in the kitchen with Caspian. She loved the way it felt to lie in the soft sheets with Caspian and place her leg over the top of his as they slept. She loved the way it felt when Caspian kissed the many bruises she had acquired from learning how exactly to use them. And she loved that they provided her opportunities like the one she was going to have today. Because as she got out of the bathtub and dried herself off, Caspian greeted her at the bedroom door with a smile as he chimed, "I think we ought to go to the market today, don't you?" She had been on the island for quite some time, and yet Caspian was hesitant about taking her to town. He was much more of a worrywart than she was, always concerned about her safety and wary of adventure. It seemed that Marceline had finally worn him down. She got dressed quickly, a smile laced across her lips. Caspian met her by the door with a gentle kiss as he wrapped a rain jacket around her. And with that, they headed out into the storm. The walk to town was not a particularly short one. While the lighthouse was on a peninsula, the quaint, cozy town was tucked in the cove on the other side. They walked down a dirt path lined with flowers and lofty trees. The flowers hung over the path, heavy with raindrops, and even more fragrant in the damp air than usual. It was like they were walking through a fairy tale world they had just to themselves. The fog hung low to the ground, causing the blues, pinks, and yellows of the flowers to pop out even more than usual. The birds' chirps were even higher than usual, as if they had to call louder and longer to be heard through the storm. Caspian and Marceline walked hand in hand, occasionally stopping to take deep, slow breaths of the island air. The rain uncovered earthy scents that were often lost beneath the other smells of the forest. They could smell the moss, the loam, the ferns, the freshly fallen bits of bark and sticks and branches. Marceline found the smells of the forest during the storm intoxicating. It was so alive, so vastly different than the ocean scents she had grown up around. And by the time they reached town, she could already smell the fragrant aroma of new things she had never smelled. The market was lined up in the center of town, down a cozy cobblestone street. Vendors sat in the safety of booths, their cooking steaming against the cool air. Marceline looked in awe at each and every booth they passed, and, seeing her excitement, Caspian knew what had to be done. He bought her a bit of everything. A funnel cake dusted with fresh white powdered sugar and accented with a bit of sugared cherries. A freshly baked pretzel, peppered with sea salt, harvested from the very harbor they were standing next to. A molasses donut dusted with sugar. A plate of nachos coated in bright yellow, gooey cheese. Marceline took a bite of one right after the other, her eyes lighting up as the new flavors overwhelmed her senses in the best way possible. Caspian ate alongside her, though he was more delighted watching her than he was eating the food. When she finished, Caspian took her gently by the hand and led her through the other booths. There were homemade wares, clothes, and toys. Everywhere you looked, there was a piece of the island made by the locals. Marceline stopped in every booth, taking it all in. And every time she did, the locals who knew Caspian more than he might have known himself smiled. They could see that Caspian was glowing, now brighter than his lighthouse, glowing in a way that he never had before. In the light of her, he seemed to be much more whole, much happier. The folks of the island, who had loved Caspian dearly since he was a small child, were delighted by this, touched by this. At the very last booth, Caspian saw Marceline's expression shift from pure awe to something even deeper. He walked to her side to discover she was looking down into an illuminated glass case, and there, in the middle, was a sea glass ring. It wasn't expensive, nor was it particularly well made. It cost a mere $5, but Marceline looked at it as though it was worth $1 million. She told Caspian in a soft voice that she had never seen such a thing. Gently, Caspian lifted the case and took the ring out. With a smile, he slid the blue sea glass ring onto her finger. She looked at it in amazement, in gratitude. That little ring, a dinky gift for tourists to buy for their children, meant the world to Marceline. Caspian bought it for her, and her eyes lit up in a way they never had before. As they walked home, he caught her gazing at her ring, as though she was in a trance more than once. They wandered through the wildflower fields and underneath the pines before Caspian finally asked why she loved the ring so much. Marceline told him that she had heard tales of rings. Sailors bought them for their beloveds. She had always wondered what they looked like, how they sparkled, how love could possibly be represented by a material object worn on your finger. But with this, she finally understood. Caspian felt himself blushing. The cool rain was even colder against his cheeks now. He wrapped his hand around Marceline's as they continued the rest of the way home. "I do love you, you know," he whispered, his voice soft and slow like the nectar of the honeysuckles growing around them. Marceline squeezed his hand and gazed into his eyes. Once more, they were suspended in time. Nothing in the past, nothing in the future mattered. They had this connection, this moment, here and now. "I love you too, Caspian," Marceline whispered back, pressing her lips to his as the rain picked up around them. A few weeks ago, they had not known each other. A few weeks ago, she was a mermaid, and he was a lighthouse keeper, their paths heading completely opposite directions. But now, their paths were the same, winding alongside the edges of this island, full of mornings, swimming out to the buoy, and burnt breakfasts, and trips to the market in the rain. As they arrived home, Marceline got settled on the couch underneath a soft wool blanket. Caspian made some fresh chamomile tea for both of them. They sat in the steam of the tea for quite some time, breathing in its fragrance, breathing in the moment they had both shared together on their walk back. They had meant it, of course. Neither of them had ever been in love before. Neither of them had felt a connection this strong, nor hoped for a future this bright. And as their fingers intertwined and Marceline rested her head on Caspian's chest, they knew they would never feel a connection this strong again. They were meant to be together. Fate had brought them together across oceans, and here they would remain. Slowly, Marceline felt her eyes growing heavy. Her hands found their way around Caspian, drawing him closer as she drifted further and further into dreamland. Caspian watched as she slipped into a peaceful night's sleep, and he thanked the heavens and the seas that she was by his side. I hope you have enjoyed this sleep story, and it's brought you a night of peaceful, relaxing sleep. Please join me again tomorrow for another sleep story. Until then, sweet dreams.